Friends and family of Congressman John Lewis are gathering in Atlanta this morning for the funeral of the civil rights icon. Former Presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, along with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, quite a distinguished lineup, are set to speak at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church today. The church, as you've heard, has played a key role in the civil rights movement. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. served as a co-pastor with his father until his death in 1968. Reverend Raphael Warnock is now the senior pastor of the church and will preside over this morning's ceremony. He is also a Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. Reverend, good morning. It's so nice to see you this morning. Listen, the nation has been paying tribute to the congressman all week, but today is a final farewell, and you are doing the honors. How would you describe, what do you want us to remember, and how would you describe your friend?
Good morning, Gail. It's great to be here with you. One of the great honors of my life has been to serve as the senior pastor to John Lewis, a true American patriot who sacrificed it all because he believed in the promise of our American democracy. And at the heart of his activism and his work as a public servant was his faith. And so it's fitting that we would be here on this day. His work and his life's mission and his perspective began at church in Troy, Alabama, and we're grateful to be with him and his family as he's crossed that final bridge into eternity.
Yeah, he walked. People who know him say he walked and lived his faith. When did you all first meet for the first time, and what do you remember about him?
Yes, I first met John Lewis as a student at Morehouse College. Some of the students had planned a protest. I was president of the chapel assistants at the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel on the campus of Morehouse College. And we invited some of the influencers and leaders in our community to join the students in the protest. We invited city council persons and others. John Lewis is the only one who showed up. He was a newly elected congressman. I remember how inspired we were as students to hear his voice, but we were more inspired just by the power of his presence, this icon in American history.
Yeah, you know, Reverend, when you said showing up,
I never dreamed that years later I would become his pastor.
Today. Yeah, and what that must mean to you. I said what that must mean to you to be his pastor, but you talked about him showing up. We interviewed the Clintons last week, and they said the thing that stood out for them about John Lewis is that he was seemingly always there, and he always showed up. Hillary Clinton tells a story about him showing up at a book signing at Costco, and he said he just happened to be in the neighborhood. That was who this man was.
That's certainly who he was, and history will remember him because he showed up in the places where it really counts. He was just captured by this whole idea of freedom. It captured his imagination. The voice of Martin Luther King Jr. Caught his attention as a young man, and he reached out to Dr. King, and forever will his deeds be etched in history. But the thing that I want to emphasize is that at the heart of his activism really was his faith, a faith passed on from enslaved ancestors. And so when you see a man stand up to Jim Clark, when you see someone go on a bridge knowing that they are facing violence and brutality, he did that because his faith represented a kind of spiritual power shaped by suffering, a moral audacity that transcended human station and called on human law to more closely align itself with the law of love. All of us are better because John Lewis came our way. As a young man, he wrestled with a call to ministry, but instead of preaching sermons, he, in a real sense, became a sermon.
Reverend, how was he able to do this with no bitterness? He talked about being beaten. He talked about almost losing his life. He had been arrested several times. We often say he loved the country when they didn't love him back. And he had no bitterness. How was he able to do that?
Well, you know, he often said that he didn't, well, Dr. King used to say that love is too heavy a burden to bear. And John Lewis internalized that. He believed it. And here we are all of these days later. John Lewis passed away almost a couple of weeks ago. And there's so much going on in the news cycle, and yet a whole nation pauses to remember him. It's because he wasn't a transactional politician. He was a transformational figure who brought all that he could bring to the promise of democracy. He kept his eye on the prize. He used to say to me all the time, keep your eyes on the prize.
Yeah, he left a great lesson for all of us. You know, did you see his op-ed this morning in the New York Times? This is something that stuck out. When you see something that's not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we called a beloved community. I love that part of the piece.
That's John Lewis. That's John Lewis, and we've got to keep his work moving forward. A lot of folks are celebrating him right now, but the best way to honor him really is to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. That was his life's work, and some of those who celebrate him right now are sitting on the Voting Rights Act. They ought to pass it and honor this true American patriot.
A lot of people are hoping that happens. Thank you very much, Reverend Warnock. We'll be thinking about you today and watching. Thank you so much, sir. We'll bring you Congressman John Lewis's funeral and a CBS News special report. It starts at 10:45 Eastern Time, 9:45 Central, right here on CBS, and, of course, on our streaming service at CBSN. And on today.